Experts revisit an 1861 photo. What they found under the enslaved woman's glove shocked them. Dr. Jennifer Marshall had examined thousands of Civil War-era photographs during her 15 years at the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture, most blurred together, plantation owners, Confederate soldiers, formal family portraits that erased the humanity of enslaved people reduced to background figures. But on a humid August morning in 2024, one image stopped her cold. The daguerreotype had arrived as part of an estate donation from a Charleston. Dated March 1861, just weeks before Fort Sumter, it showed the Beaumont family on the grand veranda of their rice plantation. The composition was standard: wealthy whites positioned prominently, enslaved servants barely visible at the margins. Jennifer almost cataloged it routinely until something caught her eye. She leaned closer to her monitor, adjusting the high-resolution scan. At the right edge of the frame stood an enslaved woman wearing white cotton gloves. House servants occasionally wore gloves for formal occasions, but these looked wrong somehow. The left glove appeared distorted, bulging unnaturally around the palm and fingers. She zoomed in, her heart beginning to race. The woman's hand was positioned stiffly against her side as if she were deliberately keeping it still. Her face showed the carefully blank expression common in photographs of enslaved people, a protective mask against the camera's intrusion. But her eyes, Jennifer enlarged the image further, her eyes seemed to hold something fierce and purposeful. "Why would you wear damaged gloves in a formal portrait?" Jennifer murmured. The Beaumonts were clearly wealthy, their clothes immaculate. They wouldn't have allowed a servant to appear in a family photograph with shabby accessories unless there was a reason. Jennifer checked the metadata. The photograph had been taken by Marcus Stein, a prominent Charleston photographer known for his technical precision. The clarity was exceptional, unusual for 1861. She could make out individual threads in the fabric, the grain of the wooden veranda, even the pattern on the woman's simple dress. But those gloves demanded explanation. Jennifer printed a high-resolution copy and studied it under magnification. The bulge in the left glove wasn't random. It had shape and structure, as if something was deliberately wrapped or concealed beneath the cotton fabric. She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Raymond Torres, the museum's conservation scientist. "Ray, I need infrared and X-ray imaging on a daguerreotype. Can you squeeze me in today?" 2 hours later, Jennifer stood in the conservation lab, watching as Raymond carefully positioned the daguerreotype under the museum's advanced imaging equipment. The technology could penetrate layers of material invisible to the naked eye, revealing hidden details, alterations, and underlying structures. "What are we looking for?" Raymond asked, adjusting the infrared sensor. "The woman's left hand," Jennifer said, pointing to the screen. "Something's wrong with that glove." Raymond initiated the scan. The infrared image appeared on the monitor, showing heat signatures and material densities. Jennifer's breath caught. Beneath the white cotton glove, clear as day, was a pattern of dense scarring, raised tissue that formed distinct shapes across the palm and fingers. "Those are burn scars," Raymond said quietly, his professional detachment cracking. "Old ones, deeply healed. And they're not accidental. Look at the pattern." Jennifer leaned closer, her stomach tightening. The scars formed letters, T and B overlapping in the center of the palm. Below them, barely visible, were numbers. 23. "Brand marks," Jennifer whispered. "They branded her like livestock." Raymond's hands stilled on the equipment. In his 20 years working with historical artifacts, he had documented countless horrors of slavery, but seeing the physical evidence so clearly still shocked him. Thomas Beaumont. Those would be his initials. And the number, her identification number in his property records. Jennifer felt rage and sorrow wash over her in equal measure. She was marked, permanently, and she knew this photograph would last, so she covered it. Raymond ran additional scans, capturing the full extent of the scarring. The brand had been applied with brutal force, the metal pressed deep enough to destroy tissue and create permanent disfigurement. The woman's hand would have been essentially crippled, the scars pulling the skin tight and limiting movement. "That's why her hand is positioned so stiffly," Raymond noted. "The scarring would have made it painful to move naturally, and look here." He pointed to another section of the scan. "There's more scarring on the back of the hand. They branded both sides." Jennifer closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. When she opened them, she looked at the original photograph with new understanding. The woman hadn't just been wearing gloves for modesty or formality. She had been making a choice, a deliberate act of resistance. In a photograph meant to document the Beaumont's wealth and status, she had refused to be displayed as marked property. "I need to find out who she was," Jennifer said firmly. Jennifer requested every document in the Beaumont donation. Elizabeth Chen delivered 3 boxes of materials: letters, account ledgers, legal papers, and personal diaries. Jennifer cleared her desk and began the painstaking process of searching for any mention of a woman who might match the figure in the photograph. Plantation records from that era rarely named enslaved people beyond first names and ages in property inventories. The Beaumont ledgers were no exception. Pages of names like Sarah, 28, or Mary, 35, with no surnames, no family connections, no individual identities beyond their monetary value. But Jennifer had one advantage: the brand mark and the photograph's date. She focused on March 1861 and cross-referenced every woman listed in the inventory around age 30 to 35. 17 women fit the general parameters. Then she found something unusual. In Thomas Beaumont's personal diary from February 1861, he had written, "Commissioned Stein for family portrait. Have instructed Rose to attend. Her presence will demonstrate our civilized treatment of the servants, particularly given recent abolitionist agitation. Rose." A name. Jennifer's pulse quickened. She searched through the inventory ledgers for any woman named Rose. In the 1860 property assessment, she found her. Rose, 32, house servant, value $1,200. The notation was sparse, but there was a reference number. See acquisition record 1847-023. Jennifer dug deeper into the boxes until she found the acquisition records from 1847. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the yellowed paper. It was a bill of sale documenting the purchase of one Negro woman named Rose, approximately 18 years of age, purchased from the estate of William Hartwell of Georgia for the sum of $800. Mark applied per standard protocol. Identification, TB23. There it was. TB23, the exact marking revealed by the infrared scan. Jennifer sat back in her chair, the full weight of what she had found settling over her. Rose had been sold at 18 years old, torn from whatever life she had known in Georgia, brought to South Carolina, and literally branded as property. She had lived at Magnolia Rise for 14 years before that photograph was taken. 14 years of servitude, bearing that mark every day. But Rose had found a way to resist. In a moment when her image would be preserved for posterity, she had covered the evidence of her dehumanization. She had asserted her dignity the only way available to her. Jennifer expanded her research, requesting records from the Hartwell estate in Georgia and searching for any documentation that might reveal more about Rose's life. She contacted Dr. Angela Price, a historian at the College of Charleston who specialized in low-country slavery and had unprecedented access to regional archives. Angela arrived at the Smithsonian 3 days later, bringing copies of documents she had found in Charleston repositories. The Beaumont family kept more detailed records than most, Angela explained, spreading papers across Jennifer's desk. Thomas Beaumont fancied himself a scientific agriculturalist. He documented everything, crop yields, weather patterns, and, unfortunately, detailed records of the people he enslaved. Among the documents was a medical log kept by the plantation's physician. In August 1847, shortly after Rose's purchase, there was an entry. Treated Rose, new acquisition, for severe burns to left hand and wrist. Brand application resulted in excessive tissue damage. Prescribed poultices and restricted work duties for 6 weeks. Hand will bear permanent scarring and limited mobility. Jennifer felt sick reading the clinical description of such deliberate cruelty, but she pressed on. Is there anything about her family? Where she came from before Georgia? Angela pulled out another document, a letter from William Hartwell to Thomas Beaumont, dated June 1847. This is where it gets more complicated, Angela said softly. Hartwell mentions in the sale correspondence that Rose was raised in the house, literate despite regulations, potentially problematic but valuable for skilled domestic work. She could read and write, Jennifer. That was incredibly rare and incredibly dangerous. Literacy among enslaved people was illegal in most southern states. Those who could read faced severe punishment if discovered. The fact that Rose had somehow learned suggested intelligence, determination, and access to education that most enslaved people were systematically denied. There's more, Angela continued, handing Jennifer a fragile piece of paper. I found this in the Charleston Historical Society archives. It's a letter written in 1865, after the war, by a woman named Rose Cooper. She was responding to a Freedmen's Bureau notice about displaced persons. Look at the handwriting. Jennifer examined the letter. The script was careful, educated, each word precisely formed. Rose Cooper was searching for her children, 2 daughters who had been sold away from Magnolia Rise in 1859. I think this is our Rose, Angela said. The timeline matches. And she took the surname Cooper, which was common for freed people to adopt names of their choosing. Jennifer and Angela worked together to piece together Rose's life from fragmentary evidence. They discovered that Rose had been born in Virginia around 1828, and learned to read from the plantation owner's daughter before being sold at age 15 to the Hartwell estate in Georgia. When Hartwell died in 1847, his estate was liquidated, and Rose was sold again, this time to Thomas Beaumont. The branding had occurred immediately upon her arrival at Magnolia Rise. Beaumont's records showed he branded all newly acquired enslaved people as a means of identification and control. For Rose, who had already endured multiple sales and separations, this final indignity marked her as property in the most brutal way possible. But Rose had not been broken. Additional documents revealed she had worked as the head house servant at Magnolia Rise, managing the household staff and, ironically, teaching the Beaumont children basic reading and arithmetic. The bitter contradiction, an enslaved woman branded like cattle, teaching her oppressor's children, spoke to both Rose's strength and the profound injustice of her situation. In 1859, financial difficulties forced Thomas Beaumont to sell several enslaved people. Among them were Rose's 2 daughters, Margaret and Elizabeth, ages 8 and 6. The sale records showed they were purchased by different buyers, one sent to a plantation in Alabama, the other to North Carolina. Rose was deliberately separated from her children, a common tactic used to punish and control enslaved people. Jennifer found a notation in Beaumont's diary from that period. Rose has become melancholic since the sale of her children. She continues her duties adequately, but with noticeable reluctance. Have warned her against spreading discontent among the other servants. Melancholic, as if losing one's children was merely a mood to be managed. By March 1861, when the photograph was taken, Rose had been living with that loss for 2 years. The approaching war must have created both fear and hope. Fear of increased hardship, hope that the conflict might bring freedom. The gloves make even more sense now, Angela said, studying the photograph. She wasn't just covering the brand. She was refusing to give Beaumont complete control over her image. He could own her body, force her to stand in his family portrait. But she wouldn't let him display his ownership mark for posterity. Jennifer nodded, understanding the profound courage that choice represented. In a world where Rose had almost no power, she had found a small but significant way to assert her humanity. Jennifer knew that discovering Rose's story was only half the work. The letter from 1865 showed Rose had been searching for her daughters. Had she ever found them? Did Rose have descendants who didn't know their ancestors' story? She contacted genealogist Marcus Johnson, who specialized in tracing African American family histories through the disruptions of slavery. Marcus had developed techniques for following family lines through fragmented records, oral histories, and DNA analysis. Finding descendants from 1861 is difficult but not impossible, Marcus explained during their first meeting. We know Rose had at least 2 daughters. If either of them survived to have children, there could be multiple family lines. The 1870 census will be crucial. It was the first to list formerly enslaved people by full names. They started with Rose Cooper's 1865 letter to the Freedmen's Bureau. She had listed herself as living in Charleston, working as a laundress, still searching for Margaret and Elizabeth. Marcus found her in the 1870 census. Rose Cooper, age 42, literate, living with a man named James Cooper, listed as her husband, and 1 child, a daughter named Ruth, age 8. She remarried and had another child after the war, Marcus noted. That gives us a direct line to trace. Over the next month, Marcus followed Ruth's descendants through census records, marriage certificates, and death records. The trail led through South Carolina, then to Philadelphia during the Great Migration, and finally to Washington, D.C. in the 1960s. He found living descendants, 3 women and 2 men, great-great-great-grandchildren of Rose Cooper, who had no idea their ancestor had been photographed in 1861, or that her story held such profound historical significance. Jennifer called the oldest descendant a woman named Dorothy Green, age 73. When Jennifer explained about the photograph and what they had discovered, Dorothy was silent for a long moment. "We knew about Rose," Dorothy finally said, her voice thick. "My grandmother used to tell stories about her. She said Rose was strong, that she had survived terrible things, but we never knew details. We didn't know about the brand or the photograph, or that she had other children who were sold away." "Would you like to see the photograph?" Jennifer asked gently. "Yes," Dorothy whispered. "Yes, I need to see her face." Jennifer arranged for Dorothy and 4 other descendants to visit the Smithsonian. She prepared a private viewing room, displaying the original daguerreotype alongside the infrared scans that revealed the brand beneath the gloves. She also gathered all the documents they had found: Rose's purchase records, the Beaumont diaries, the 1865 letter, and census records tracing the family line. When the family arrived, Jennifer felt the weight of the moment. She was about to show them evidence of their ancestors' suffering, but also proof of her extraordinary courage and dignity. Dorothy approached the photograph first, her hand shaking as she reached toward the glass case. "That's her," she said softly. "That's Rose. Look at her eyes. She's not defeated. She's enduring." Her cousin, Michael Green, stood beside her, tears streaming down his face. "They branded her, like an animal. How did she survive that?" Jennifer guided them through the documents explaining each discovery. When she showed them the infrared scan revealing the brand marks, the room fell silent. The physical evidence of such cruelty was overwhelming. The initials TB and the number 23 burned into human flesh. But Jennifer also showed them Rose's 1865 letter, her careful handwriting searching for her lost daughters. "She never stopped looking for Margaret and Elizabeth," Jennifer explained. "Even after everything she endured, she fought to reunite her family." Dorothy's daughter Patricia asked the question they were all thinking. "Did she ever find them?" Marcus stepped forward. "We don't know yet about Margaret, but I found Elizabeth." He pulled out a document, a letter from 1868, sent from North Carolina to Charleston. Elizabeth wrote to her mother. She had survived the war, been freed, and tracked down her mother's location through church networks. They were reunited. The room erupted in tears and exclamations. After 163 years, Rose's descendants were learning that at least one family connection had been restored, that Rose's search had not been in vain. "There's more," Marcus continued. "Ruth, the daughter Rose had after the war, was your direct ancestor. But Elizabeth also had children. That means some of you are descended from Ruth, but there are other branches of the family descended from Elizabeth. I found 7 more living descendants through Elizabeth's line." The family spent hours examining the documents, asking questions, processing the magnitude of what they were learning. They saw their ancestor not as a nameless figure in the background of someone else's portrait, but as a fully realized person, branded, separated from her children, yet still fighting for dignity and reunion. As the research deepened, Jennifer and Angela discovered the full context of the 1861 photograph. In Thomas Beaumont's diary, they found his reasoning for commissioning the portrait and including Rose. The abolitionists claim we treat our servants cruelly. This portrait will demonstrate the civilized nature of our household. Rose, being well-dressed and properly gloved, will serve as evidence of our benevolent treatment. The bitter irony was profound. Beaumont had specifically chosen Rose to demonstrate his supposed kindness, never knowing she was deliberately concealing the brand he had inflicted upon her. His attempt to use her presence as propaganda had backfired across time, becoming instead evidence of both his cruelty and her resistance. Further investigation revealed that Marcus Stein, the photographer, had been privately sympathetic to abolition, though he couldn't express it openly in Charleston society. His technical precision in capturing the photograph, the exceptional clarity that made modern analysis possible, may have been deliberate, preserving evidence for future generations. Jennifer also discovered what happened to Magnolia Rise Plantation. In 1865, as Sherman's army approached Charleston, Thomas Beaumont fled with his family. The enslaved people remaining on the plantation, including those who had been unable to escape earlier, burned the main house and destroyed the property records they could find. It was an act of liberation and revenge, erasing the documentation of their bondage. Rose had been among those who stayed. According to testimony given to the Freedmen's Bureau, she had helped organize the burning, ensuring that the brand records and sale documents were destroyed. The photograph and a few papers that Thomas Beaumont had taken with him were among the only records that survived. She tried to erase the evidence of what had been done to her, Angela said. The brand on her hand couldn't be removed, but she could destroy the paper trail that documented her as property. The photograph is one of the few pieces that survived. The revelation added another layer to Rose's story. She had covered the brand in the photograph, then later tried to destroy the records entirely. Both actions were assertions of her humanity, refusals to accept the identity that had been forced upon her. The infrared technology that revealed the brand also showed something else, healed fractures in several fingers, suggesting Rose's hand had been broken at some point, probably from punishment or harsh labor. She had endured extraordinary physical suffering, yet had maintained her dignity and will to resist. The Smithsonian announced plans for a special exhibition centered on Rose's story. The photograph would be displayed alongside the infrared scans, the historical documents, and testimonies from her descendants. The exhibition would be called Beneath the Gloves, Rose's Resistance and the Hidden History of Slavery. Media coverage of the discovery sparked national conversation about the physical brutality of slavery, the resilience of those who survived it, and the importance of centering enslaved people's perspectives in historical narratives. Rose's deliberate choice to cover the brand resonated with millions. Here was a woman who, in a moment of profound powerlessness, had found a way to assert control over her own image. Dorothy and her family became advocates for telling Rose's complete story. At the exhibition's opening, Dorothy stood before the photograph and spoke to a crowd of hundreds. "My great-great-great-grandmother Rose was branded like livestock," she said, her voice strong despite the tears on her face. But she refused to be defined by that brand. She covered it in this photograph because she knew this image would last, and she wanted future generations to see her as a person, not as property. She wanted us to see her dignity, not just her suffering. The exhibition included an interactive element where visitors could learn about the practice of branding enslaved people, see other examples from historical records, and understand the physical and psychological trauma it inflicted. But the focus remained on Rose, her intelligence, her literacy, her determination to find her children, her participation in burning the plantation records, and her choice to cover the brand. Forensic artists worked with the family to create a reconstruction of what Rose might have looked like outside the constraints of the photograph, smiling, at ease, without the careful mask she wore in the Beaumont family portrait. That image was displayed beside the original, showing two versions of the same woman, the one forced to stand in her oppressor's photograph, and the one who might have existed in freedom. The family also shared oral histories that had been passed down through generations. Rose had lived until 1889, dying at age 61 in Charleston. She had seen her daughter Elizabeth regularly, watched her grandchildren grow up, and worked as a teacher in a school for freed people. She had lived to see the promise of Reconstruction, and also its tragic betrayal as white supremacy reasserted itself in the South. She never forgot what had been done to her, Dorothy said. But she also didn't let it destroy her. She built a life in freedom, raised children, helped others learn to read. The brand was part of her story, but it wasn't the whole story. All in the months following the exhibition's opening, Rose's story sparked a broader reckoning with how slavery is remembered and represented. Museums across the country began reviewing their collections with new attention to the hidden stories of enslaved people, using advanced imaging technology to reveal what had been overlooked or deliberately concealed. 3 more photographs from the same era were found to contain similar evidence. Enslaved people wearing gloves, long sleeves, or strategically positioned clothing to cover brand marks and scars. Each represented an individual act of resistance, a refusal to be displayed as marked property. The family established the Rose Cooper Memorial Fund, providing scholarships for descendants of enslaved people and supporting research into African American genealogy. They worked with geneticists to trace Margaret's descendants, eventually finding 12 more family members descended from Rose's daughter, who had been sold to Alabama. The reunion was emotional and profound, connecting people who had never known they were related. Jennifer's research was published in multiple academic journals and became the basis for a documentary film. But for her, the most meaningful moment came when Dorothy brought her grandmother's diary to the museum. The grandmother, Rose's granddaughter, had written in 1923, "Mama Rose used to show me her hand and tell me to remember. They tried to make me a thing," she would say, "but I am a person. Always was, always will be. Don't you ever forget that." Those words became the epitaph for the exhibition, a statement of resilience and humanity that resonated across generations. The photograph itself took on new meaning. What had been created as propaganda for slavery became evidence of its brutality and of the extraordinary courage of those who survived it. Rose's face, her direct gaze, her gloved hands, all of it spoke to her refusal to be erased, her determination to be remembered as fully human. On the final day of the exhibition, Jennifer stood alone in the gallery after closing, looking at Rose's photograph. She thought about the journey from that March day in 1861, when Rose stood on the Beaumont veranda wearing white gloves to cover her scars, to this moment when millions had seen her image and learned her story. Rose had wanted to hide the brand from the photograph, to prevent future generations from seeing her only as marked property. But by revealing what lay beneath the gloves, Jennifer and her colleagues had not diminished Rose's dignity. They had amplified her resistance, shown the full truth of what she had endured and overcome. The photograph remained what Rose had made it, a testament to her humanity, her courage, and her refusal to be defined by the cruelty inflicted upon her. The gloves had concealed the physical evidence of slavery's brutality, but they could not hide the strength in Rose's eyes, the intelligence in her bearing, the absolute presence of a person who knew her own worth. And now, 163 years later, the world knew it too.